This has never happened before. At 3:14 this morning, the Constitution did exactly what it was designed to do, and the president refused to accept it. That contradiction is now at the center of American power. A legal transfer of authority occurred in the dark, by the book, and within minutes it collided with physical resistance inside the White House. And this isn't abstract. This isn't theoretical. If this unravels, it doesn't stay in Washington. It reaches your money, your safety, and the stability you assume is always there. Here's what we know, and every detail matters. At 3:14 a.m. Eastern Time, a courier left the vice president's residence at the Naval Observatory. He was carrying 2 sealed envelopes, one addressed to the Speaker of the House, the other to the President pro tempore of the Senate. Inside both envelopes was the same single-page document signed by the vice president and a majority of the sitting cabinet, formally stating that the president of the United States is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. The moment those documents were received by congressional leadership, power transferred instantly. No vote, no hearing, no court. By the plain text of the Constitution, the vice president became acting president at that exact minute. But here's where the story flips. The president did not step aside. According to multiple sources, he is inside the White House residence right now, physically barricaded, directing the Secret Service to block the vice president from entering the grounds and publicly declaring that what just happened is not constitutional process, but an illegal coup. Which means at this moment, the United States has 2 people claiming to be commander-in-chief. 2 voices issuing orders, 2 chains of authority that cannot both be valid, and trapped between them is the entire machinery of government, including the one system that cannot afford ambiguity. Stay with me, because the next question decides whether this remains a constitutional crisis or becomes something far more dangerous. Before we go any further, you need to understand what this moment actually represents, because if you misunderstand it, everything that follows stops making sense. Most people hear 25th Amendment and think of death. A president collapses, a tragedy, a clean handoff. That's not this. What happened overnight is Section 4, the part of the Constitution that was never meant to be used in public, in conflict, or in real time. It was written for a president who is alive, conscious, and still insisting he's in charge, while the people closest to him conclude he can't be trusted with power anymore. And notice the timing. This didn't happen after an election. It didn't happen during a health emergency broadcast on television. It happened quietly at 3:14 in the morning through sealed envelopes, signatures, and procedure. That alone tells you this wasn't impulsive. This was coordinated, deliberate, and treated as an emergency. Here's the core event, stripped down to what matters. The vice president and a majority of the cabinet signed a document declaring the president unable to perform his duties. Under the Constitution, that declaration doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait for debate. The instant Congress receives it, authority transfers. That's the design: speed over consensus, continuity over comfort. But here's the question that reframes everything. What happens when the system works and the person it restrains refuses to stop? Because this isn't just about legality. It's about compliance. It's about whether written authority can override physical control. And that tension between what the Constitution says and what people actually do is what turns a process into a crisis. And now that you understand the framework, the next detail changes how you see the entire night. The strongest claim being made right now is that this was a last resort. Not politics, not timing, not optics, an emergency break, and there's a specific detail that supports that. According to multiple sources, the cabinet didn't meet at the White House. They met in secret at the vice president's residence, the Naval Observatory, last night. Not days ago, not weeks ago, hours before the declaration was sent. And they met after what one senior Justice Department official described as a specific incident earlier that afternoon. Here's what's being reported, and this is where we separate fact from implication. Fact: multiple sources say the president issued a direct order involving the military. Fact: that order was refused by the Secretary of Defense. Fact: the refusal triggered an immediate escalation inside the administration. What's still being investigated is the precise language of that order, but multiple accounts converge on the same allegation. The president allegedly ordered active duty military personnel to seize voting machines in a swing state ahead of the upcoming election. That's not a policy dispute. That's not a gray area. And notice what's missing so far. No denial that the order was discussed, no statement saying it never happened, just silence followed by a declaration calling the cabinet's move a coup. According to the officials who signed that document, that was the line. They believed that if they did not act last night, American soldiers could be deployed against American civilians by morning. In their view, this was the exact scenario Section 4 was written for. But here's where the tension tightens, because even if that justification holds, even if the process was legal, even if the signatures are valid, none of it answers the most dangerous question now hanging over Washington. Who does the military listen to when the orders start coming in? That's where this stops being theoretical. This is where the story leaves paperwork behind and enters real-world consequences, because the moment you have two people claiming presidential authority, every system that relies on a single chain of command starts to fracture. And nowhere is that fracture more dangerous than inside the military. Here's a concrete detail most people overlook. Wherever the president goes, there is a military aide within arm's reach carrying a briefcase. You've seen it on camera 100 times. The nuclear football. Inside are the authentication materials required to authorize a nuclear strike. What's less talked about is that the vice president also has a military aide carrying an identical briefcase. Under normal circumstances, those codes are dormant. They exist for continuity, a backup that stays inactive unless something definitive happens. At 3:14 a.m., something definitive did happen. By the text of the Constitution, the vice president became acting president at that moment, which means on paper his launch authority should have activated instantly, and the sitting presidents should have been deactivated just as instantly. But here's the part nobody ever had to operationalize before. Who actually flips that switch? That decision doesn't happen in the White House. It runs through the National Military Command Center at the Pentagon. And according to sources, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is right now inside the most secure conference room in the building, confronting a question no one in that role has ever faced. If the president issues a launch order right now, does the military execute it? Or do they refuse on the grounds that he is no longer commander-in-chief? If they refuse and they're wrong, they've just committed the most consequential act of insubordination in American history. If they comply and they're wrong, they've just followed an illegal order from someone without authority. And here's why this matters beyond theory. Nuclear deterrence depends on certainty. It depends on adversaries believing that American command and control is coherent, stable, and unquestioned. The moment that certainty cracks, even slightly, deterrence degrades. And this isn't happening in private. This is visible. Foreign intelligence services are watching this unfold in real time, measuring confusion, timing responses, and recalculating risk. Now watch how fast this escalates. Because while generals are wrestling with command authority, something else is breaking down much closer to the White House. The most immediate flashpoint isn't the military. It's the people with guns already inside the building. The Secret Service exists for one purpose: protect the president. Not the office in theory, the person in practice. Agents spend years on a single protective detail. They build trust, loyalty, muscle memory. They are trained to react without hesitation when that person is threatened. And overnight, that instinct was put into direct conflict with the Constitution. According to multiple sources, the head of the Presidential Protective Detail has refused to allow the vice president's security team onto White House grounds. His position is blunt. He takes orders from the president. And until the president leaves the building, no one else comes in. Think about what that means in real terms. Armed federal agents facing each other across a perimeter. One side protecting the elected president who still occupies the residence. The other tasked with securing access for the acting president who now holds legal authority. Both sides believing they are following lawful orders. Both sides trained never to back down. This is where normalization becomes dangerous, because what should never be normal is a standoff between federal protective details inside the executive branch. But here it is, unfolding quietly, without a script, without precedent. And while that tension is building inside the gates, pressure is mounting outside them. The president has not gone silent. Despite reported attempts by aides to limit his access, he has been posting continuously on social media. He's framing the cabinet's action as treason. He's claiming infiltration. And then came the line that set off alarms across law enforcement agencies. Come to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Protect your president. Within hours, live feeds showed crowds forming near the White House, people arriving by car, by metro, on foot, some visibly armed, D.C. Metropolitan Police requesting backup, emergency coordination calls lighting up across agencies. And here's where the crisis multiplies. Washington, D.C. does not have a governor. The authority to deploy the National Guard belongs to the president. So if the acting president orders the Guard to secure federal buildings and the sitting president issues a counter order telling them to stand down, those soldiers face an impossible choice: obey the man who was elected or the man who currently holds constitutional authority. There is no training manual for this, no precedent to fall back on. Every commander, every officer, every soldier is now making individual judgments under extreme pressure. And one wrong decision, one misunderstanding, what is enough to turn confusion into confrontation. And that brings us to the moment that changes how this ends. This is the part where the crisis stops belonging to Washington and starts touching you. Because once authority is contested at the top, everything downstream becomes unstable. Markets don't wait for constitutional clarity. Supply chains don't pause for legal arguments. Allies don't know who they're allowed to talk to. And ordinary people feel the shock before anyone explains it. Here's a concrete signal that this is already happening. According to reports, foreign leaders have been trying to reach the White House and failing. One call was reportedly placed on hold because staff could not determine who was authorized to take it. Not because the line was busy, because the chain of command was unclear. That's not drama, that's breakdown. And it doesn't stop with diplomacy. Futures markets reacted almost immediately. Volatility spiked. Uncertainty priced itself in within minutes. When power is ambiguous, risk explodes. And risk doesn't stay abstract. It hits retirement accounts. It hits borrowing costs. It hits the price of stability that most people assume is permanent. Now bring it closer. If crowds continue to gather, if armed supporters move closer to federal buildings, if law enforcement is caught between conflicting orders about whether to disperse or protect them, that pressure lands on individual officers, people with names, people with families, people making split-second decisions without clear backing. This is how systems fail, not all at once, but in fragments, in delays, in hesitation. And here's the quiet truth underneath all of this. The Constitution was designed to work only if people stop when it tells them to stop. It has no enforcement arm of its own, no police force, no army. It relies on compliance, on shared acceptance, on the assumption that no one will push past the point of mutual recognition. That assumption is now being tested. And the next phase of this story doesn't depend on law. It depends on time, because a clock has started ticking, and when it expires, everything shifts again. This is where the system reveals its final safeguard and its biggest weakness, because the Constitution anticipated defiance. It built in a countermove. The president can send his own written declaration to Congress stating that no inability exists, that he is fully capable of discharging the powers and duties of the office. Sources say that letter is being drafted right now. And the moment that document is delivered, power snaps back immediately, just as fast as it transferred away at 3:14 a.m. No negotiation, no pause, no cooling off period. Authority changes hands again in an instant. But that doesn't end the crisis. It escalates it. Because if the vice president and the cabinet respond within 4 days with a second declaration disputing the president's claim, the fight moves to Congress. And now the stakes widen dramatically. Lawmakers are forced to assemble within 48 hours. From there, they have 21 days to decide who holds presidential authority. And the threshold is brutal. 2/3 of both the House and the Senate are required to permanently remove the president. Miss that number, even narrowly, and power reverts back to him, which means the country could be staring down 3 weeks of constitutional limbo. 21 days where every executive order, every military instruction, every diplomatic message exists in a gray zone. Not clearly legal, not clearly void, just contested. And notice what that creates. It turns time itself into a weapon. Pressure mounts on markets, on foreign governments, on agencies forced to choose sides quietly. The longer uncertainty lasts, the more damage it does, regardless of how it ends. This is why systems rarely collapse from a single blow. They erode under unresolved tension. And right now, the next move hasn't been made yet. Here's the unsettling part most coverage misses. This isn't just a legal crisis, it's an incentives crisis. Every major institution involved right now is under pressure to act in its own self-interest. Agencies want protection from blame. Lawmakers want survival. Military leaders want clarity without responsibility. And when incentives diverge like this, systems don't fail loudly. They fail quietly through delay, ambiguity, and selective action. Think about what that means. Orders may not be openly rejected. They may just be slow-walked. Calls not returned, meetings postponed, decisions pending review, power doesn't vanish, it blurs, and blurred authority is often more dangerous than outright chaos because it looks stable right up until it isn't. This is how contested power really works, not with dramatic announcements, but with subtle freezes, with people waiting to see who wins before committing, with institutions hedging instead of leading. And here's the insight that should make you uneasy. If this resolves quickly, the system will be praised for holding. If it drags on, the lesson learned inside government won't be about restraint. It will be about leverage, about how far you can push before anyone stops you, about which pressure points matter most when written rules collide with human behavior. That lesson doesn't disappear when this moment ends. It stays. Because the next time a crisis hits, the playbook will be thicker, the assumptions weaker, the guardrails more cosmetic than real. And now we reach the fork in the road, because from here there are only two paths forward. From here the trajectory splits. On one path the standoff de-escalates. The president submits his declaration. The cabinet responds. Congress moves quickly. Clear votes, clear margins, clear authority. Markets stabilize. Agencies realign. The story ends with relief and a collective belief that the system bent, but held. That path requires speed, discipline, and restraint from everyone involved. The other path is slower, messier, more dangerous. On that path, declarations are delayed, votes are contested, crowds grow, agencies hesitate. Every hour of uncertainty invites speculation, pressure, and miscalculation. Foreign governments begin to hedge, markets price in prolonged instability, and the longer ambiguity lasts, the more normalized it becomes. Here's the critical detail. Both paths start the same way, with silence. Right now, the next decisive document has not been delivered. The counter-declaration hasn't arrived. Congress hasn't been forced to act. The system is suspended between moves, and that suspension is doing real damage in real time. History doesn't usually turn on speeches. It turns on moments like this. Gaps, pauses, decisions not yet made. And the outcome won't hinge on ideology. It will hinge on whether the next move clarifies authority or deepens the fog. Here's the insight that ties all of this together. This isn't a story about one president, one cabinet, or one amendment. It's a story about whether systems built on shared belief can survive direct defiance. The Constitution doesn't enforce itself. It persuades. It assumes that when lines are crossed, people will stop. What you're watching now is what happens when that assumption is challenged in real time. Power, in the end, doesn't live on paper. It lives where orders are followed, where doors open, where phones get answered. And right now, those signals are fractured. Legal authority sits in one place, physical control sits in another, and the gap between them is where instability grows. This moment will be remembered no matter how it ends. If it resolves cleanly, it becomes proof the system can absorb shock. If it doesn't, it becomes a template, a demonstration of how far pressure can be applied before something gives. And here's the part that should stay with you. Every future crisis will be measured against this one. Every leader will remember what worked, what didn't, and how close the country came to the edge before anyone blinked. That knowledge doesn't disappear, it accumulates. What happens next won't just decide who holds power tonight, it will shape how power is tested tomorrow. If you want clear, calm analysis as this unfolds, without noise, without spin, follow and subscribe, because the next move is coming. And when it does, it won't be announced loudly. It will arrive quietly. And by the time everyone notices, the direction may already be set.